The storm came in fast that morning, rolling off the distant hills like a gray curtain. Out here in Pine Hollow, storms weren't just weather, they were moods, omens, sometimes even warnings. Folks could tell by the way the wind carried through the valley when something was about to happen, something big. I was standing on my porch with a steaming cup of black coffee when I saw the silver SUV crawl down Maple Ridge Lane. It slowed in front of my house, then stopped altogether. I didn't need to see the license plate to know who it was. Karen Whitmore. She stepped out, heels clicking against the asphalt like she owned it. Karen wasn't just my neighbor, she was president of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association, and she carried that title the way a sheriff carried a badge. Too much pride, too much power, too little sense. She smoothed her stiff blonde hair, straightened her blazer, and adjusted the clipboard tucked under her arm. The storm winds tugged at her jacket, but she planted her feet like she was rooted to the earth. Then she looked right at me, standing on my porch, and gave that tight little smile of hers, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning, Samuel," she called, raising her voice over the wind. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and nodded. "Karen, you're up early. Early bird gets the worm," she said. Or, in this case, the early president handles violations before they get out of hand. Violations, that was her favorite word. She clicked down the walkway like she was striding into a courtroom. The storm clouds had turned the sky a deep bruised purple, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain and soil. But Karen didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were locked on the driveway where my old Ford pickup sat. That truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was family history. My father bought it brand new in 1972, and when I came back from my first tour overseas, he tossed me this and said, "She's yours now, son. Treat her better than you treat yourself." I had. Every dent, every patch of rust, every rebuilt part told a story. That truck wasn't just steel and rubber. It was blood, sweat, and memory. Karen set her clipboard on the hood like she had every right to touch it. She tapped her pen against the metal. "This truck," she said, "it has to go." I stared at her. "What did you just say?" "It violates HOA regulations. Section 14, subparagraph 3, vehicles must be of acceptable condition, free from visible rust and consistent with neighborhood standards." She recited it like scripture. "This truck, Samuel, is an eyesore. We've had complaints." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Complaints from who?" "That's confidential," she said smoothly. "But you know how it is. Property values, appearances, first impressions. We can't let one non-compliant vehicle drag the whole neighborhood down." I stepped off the porch, boots hitting the gravel with a crunch. The wind whipped at my jacket as I closed the distance between us. She didn't flinch, didn't back up. "This truck isn't going anywhere," I said, my voice steady. She arched one thin eyebrow. "It will, Samuel, whether you like it or not. The HOA has authority. I'm giving you 72 hours to remove it from the property. After that, we'll take action." Her words hung in the air, sharp as barbed wire. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The storm broke above us, raindrops splattering against the hood of the truck, darkening the clipboard she still clutched. She tucked it under her arm, adjusted her blazer again, and smiled that cold smile. "You'll see," she said softly. "This is bigger than you." Then she turned, climbed back into her SUV and drove away, taillights glowing red against the gray rain. I didn't move for a long time. The rain soaked my shirt, but I just stood there staring at that truck. My father's truck, my truck. Karen had overstepped plenty of times before, sending letters about my lawn being half an inch too tall, complaining about the flag I flew on Memorial Day, even trying to dictate the kind of porch lights I could install. But this was different. This was personal. By evening, word had already spread. Pine Hollow was small. Gossip traveled faster than wildfire. At the diner, folks avoided my eyes. At the hardware store, conversations hushed when I walked past. It didn't take a genius to know Karen had been talking. "She's just doing her job," one neighbor muttered when he thought I was out of earshot. "Rules are rules," said another. "Rules." That's what they always said when they wanted to hide behind power. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. When I pulled the curtain back, my jaw tightened. 2 sheriff's cruisers sat in front of my house, lights flashing. And there, standing proudly between them like she'd summoned the cavalry, was Karen. She pointed at the truck. Her lips were moving fast, explaining, complaining, convincing. One of the deputies, a young guy with nervous eyes, nodded along. The other, Sheriff Clay Matheson himself, stood with his arms crossed, chewing on a tooth. I walked outside, slow and steady. "Morning, Sheriff," I said. He gave me a nod. "Sam." Karen's face lit up like a cat who'd caught a bird. "Sheriff, you see what I'm talking about. This vehicle is in direct violation of HOA code. It's been 72 hours and he hasn't moved it. I demand action." The deputy shifted uncomfortably, but the sheriff kept chewing his toothpick. He studied me for a long moment. "Sam," he said finally, "any reason you're refusing to comply?" I looked at the truck, then back at him. My voice came out low, steady. "Because it's mine. Because it belongs here, and because no HOA president, no neighbor, and no sheriff is gonna tell me to erase my own history." Karen's face twisted with anger. "History, it's junk, and the rules." "Karen," the sheriff cut her off. "Last I checked, the HOA doesn't outrank the Constitution." Her jaw dropped, but before relief could wash over me, he added, "That said, if enough neighbors complain, it could fall under public nuisance. And then it's not about HOA rules anymore. Then it's my problem." The storm inside me roared louder than the one outside. A public nuisance. That was the line they were ready to cross. Karen saw her opening. She leaned in toward the sheriff, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Exactly. It's a danger. Children walk these streets. Property values are at stake. We can't let one stubborn man put the whole community at risk." I clenched my fists. "This isn't about property value. This is about you not getting your way." Her eyes met mine, cold and unyielding. "This is about order, something you clearly don't respect." For a moment it felt like the whole world held its breath. The deputies shifted. The sheriff's jaw worked on his toothpick. Karen's smile spread slow and victorious. And I realized something. This wasn't just about a truck. This was war. That night, as the storm raged and rain hammered the tin roof, I sat in the dim light of my living room, staring at the old photo album stacked on the coffee table. Pictures of my father in his work overalls, standing proud beside that very truck. Pictures of me, younger, with dirt on my face and grease on my hands, fixing the engine for the first time. They weren't just photographs. They were proof. Proof of where I came from, proof of who I was. Karen wanted to erase that, and I couldn't let her. I poured another cup of coffee, the bitter kind that keeps you awake long after you should have been asleep, and I thought about every time I'd seen folks like her grab power and use it to grind down anyone who stood in their way. I'd seen it overseas. I'd seen it in government halls, and now I was seeing it in my own backyard. By the time the sun rose over Pine Hollow the next morning, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to roll over. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But here's the thing about small town. Once the seed of conflict is planted, it grows fast. By midweek, the letters started showing up in my mailbox. Typed, unsigned, but all saying the same thing. "Do the right thing. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Stop being selfish." One letter, scrawled in angry handwriting, said simply, "Move the damn truck." It wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the whole neighborhood. Everywhere I went, eyes followed, some with pity, some with judgment, and some with fear, like siding with me might put them in Karen's crosshairs next. I kept my head high, but inside a storm brewed. Because what none of them knew, not Karen, not the sheriff, not a single one of those neighbors, was that I wasn't just some stubborn old man clinging to his past. I was Samuel Harlan, federal interior chief. And if they thought I was going to let an HOA president steal what was mine, they had no idea what kind of fight they'd just picked. The rain finally stopped that evening, leaving the air heavy and the ground soft beneath my boots. I stood in the driveway, hand resting on the hood of the old Ford, and I swore to my father's memory they weren't taking it, no matter what it cost me. And when the next knock came at my door, loud and sharp in the still night, I knew the battle had only just begun. The days that followed felt colder, even though the August sun still baked the valley. It wasn't the weather that chilled me. It was the stares, the whisper, the silence where once there had been easy conversation. Small towns had a way of choosing sides, and Pine Hollow had chosen them. At the diner, old friends wouldn't meet my eye. Martha, who'd served me coffee every Saturday morning for 15 years, slid my mug across the counter without a word. The sheriff's cruiser passed my house twice a day now, slower each time, like he was waiting for me to slip up. Even the paper boy tossed my copy of the Gazette a little harder than usual, like the whole town had decided I'd become the enemy. And through it all, Karen Whitmore thrived. I saw her one afternoon strutting down Main Street with her clipboard, laughing with a group of neighbors. She held court outside the pharmacy, pointing in the direction of Maple Ridge Lane, where my house sat like a black mark on her perfect canvas. Folks nodded, frowned, and patted her shoulder like she was some kind of saint, protecting them from the big bad wolf at the end of the block. The woman was building an army, and I was her only target. The next escalation came in the form of an official letter, delivered by certified mail. The envelope bore the HOA seal, printed bold and smug across the corner. Final notice. Inside, the words dripped with threat, cloaked in polite language. Failure to comply will result in fines of $500 per week, escalating up to legal action, repossession of said vehicle, and potential foreclosure proceeding. I read it twice, then a third time my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. They weren't just coming for the truck, they were coming for my home. That evening I drove into town. The old Ford rumbled beneath me, stubborn as I was, each mile marker a reminder of what I stood to lose. I parked outside the barber shop, where a few of the old boys usually gathered playing cards and swapping stories. I stepped inside, the smell of hair tonic and cigar smoke wrapping around me like memory. The chatter died the second they saw me. "Even in, fellas," I said, forcing a steady tone. Nobody answered. I turned to Earl, the barber who'd cut my hair since I was 12. "Earl, you believe this nonsense? They're threatening foreclosure over a truck." Earl's eyes flicked to the others, then back to me. His voice was low, uneasy. "Sam, maybe just move it. You know how folks are about their property values." Karen says, I snapped, louder than I meant to. The men flinched. When did her word become law around here? Silence. I looked at each of them, men I'd worked beside, men who'd borrowed my tools, men whose kids I'd helped coach in Little League years back. Not one would meet my eyes. Betrayal, I realized, didn't always come with knives. Sometimes it came with silence. The next blow came from someone I never expected. My closest friend, Tom Dillard. Tom and I went way back, Army buddies, carpenters together, fishing partners on slow summer morning. He lived just 3 houses down. For weeks, he'd stayed quiet, nodding when we crossed paths, not saying much. I figured at least he was staying out of it. Then one morning, I found a folded note tucked under my door. Tom's handwriting. "Sam, I'm sorry. Karen's right. This fight ain't worth it. The truck has to go. Don't drag the rest of us down with you." My hands shook as I read it. I must have stood there an hour, staring at those words, trying to make sense of them. Tom, of all people, what would you have done if your own best friend sided with the people trying to strip you of everything? I burned the note in the fireplace that night, watching the flames devour the paper until it was nothing but ash. But the words stuck in my chest like splinters. By the second week, the fines had begun. $500, then another $500, envelopes piling up in the mailbox stamped with red ink. Past due, immediate action required. I ignored them, stacking them on the kitchen table like trophies of defiance. But the weight of them pressed down on me. Each fine wasn't just money, it was a reminder that they were tightening the noose, one letter at a time. And then came the night I realized Karen wasn't stopping at fines. It was close to midnight, the crickets loud in the humid air when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, gravel crunching under boots. I eased the curtain back just enough to see. 3 figures stood in my driveway, flashlights cutting across the dark. They circled the truck like vultures, beams of light crawling across the hood, the tires, the rusted panels. One of them pulled out a phone, snapped pictures. Another took notes on a clipboard. Karen. Of course it was Karen. Her voice carried soft through the night. "Document everything. The more evidence we have, the faster the court moves." My hands tightened around the curtain until the fabric tore. They weren't just circling my truck, they were circling my life. The next morning I marched straight into the sheriff's office. The air smelled of old coffee and dust, the walls lined with faded photos of Pine Hollow sheriff's past. Sheriff Matheson sat behind his desk, leaning back, boots propped up, toothpick rolling between his teeth. "You got a minute?" I asked. He gestured at the chair across from him. "Always." I sat, leaning forward, voice low and steady. "Karen came onto my property last night, middle of the night, trespassing, photographing my truck. I want to file a report. The sheriff scratched his chin, not meeting my eyes. Sam, technically, HOA officers can inspect for violations if they've got reason. My voice rose. At midnight. He shrugged. They're within their rights. I slammed my fist on the desk. And what about my rights, Clay? What about a man's right to his own damn property? The sheriff finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. Look, Sam, between you and me, I don't care about that truck. But the town does, Karen does, and I got elections coming up. You understand? Elections, votes, popularity. That's what it all boiled down to. I stood, heat boiling in my chest. So you're siding with— I'm siding with keeping the peace, he said calmly. Peace? I leaned in close, my voice like gravel. This ain't peace, Sheriff. This is war dressed up in paperwork. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. But he didn't stop me when I walked out. By the end of the month, the pressure was unbearable. Neighbors whispered, friends vanished, fines stacked higher. Karen paraded around town like she'd already won, her SUV parked smug in the HOA office lot, clipboard in hand like a weapon. And me, I stood alone. But I didn't break, because deep down, I knew something Karen didn't. I wasn't just Samuel Harlan, the stubborn old man clinging to a rusty truck. I was Samuel Harlan, chief of the federal interior. I knew laws she'd never even heard of. I had access to records she couldn't dream of. I had authority that could turn her little empire into dust with a single signature. I hadn't used that power in years. Not here. Not in Pine Hollow, because this town was supposed to be my refuge, my quiet corner of the world. But Karen had brought the fight to my doorstep. And when a man pushed far enough, he doesn't just push back. He changes the game. The turning point came one quiet evening. I was sitting in the driveway, oil-stained rag in hand, tuning up the old Ford's engine just to hear her purr again, when something caught my eye. A folder. It was tucked halfway under the seat, old and yellowed with time. I pulled it out, flipped it open. Inside were papers, handwritten notes from my father, receipts, even a small, folded map. But tucked between them was something else. An original deed, not just to the truck, but to the land. A deed dated decades earlier, signed and sealed in a way that predated the Pine Hollow HOA itself. The realization hit me like a hammer. This wasn't just a truck. This wasn't just a house. This was legacy land. My father had bought it free and clear, under agreements that the HOA had no legal right to override. Karen had built her empire on ruin fines, but I had something stronger, something older, something untouchable. I looked at the paper, the sunset casting gold across the ink, and for the first time in weeks I smiled, because the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The folder sat heavy in my lap long after the sun dipped behind the hills. The crickets sang, the cicadas buzzed, but all I heard was my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. An original deed, signed by county clerks long before Karen Whitmore even set foot in Pine Hollow. The ink was faded, the paper fragile, but the seal, the county seal, was as clear as the day it had been pressed. This wasn't just a technicality. This was a wall of law standing between me and the HOA. The land, my father's land, was exempt. I ran my fingers across the old map folded inside, edges worn soft with time. Pine Hollow looked different back then. Fewer roads, larger lots, wide fields instead of neat subdivisions. Our property, marked with my father's handwriting, was set apart, and in the margin, in his careful script, were 4 words that changed everything. Never let them take it. It felt like he was speaking straight to me from the grave. The next morning, I drove down to the county archive. The clerk, a young man with glasses too big for his face, eyed the papers I slid across the counter. "Where'd you get these?" he asked, adjusting his frames. "They've been in my family for 50 years. He studied the seal, the signatures, the dates. Then he disappeared into the back, returning with a thick book bound in cracked leather. He flipped through until he found the entry. "Well," he said slowly, "this deed is legitimate, recorded back in '72 before the Pine Hollow HOA charter was filed. Looks like your parcel is technically excluded from their authority." "Excluded," I repeated. He nodded. "They never updated the charter to account for your land, which means they can't enforce their codes on your property at all." I felt a slow burn of satisfaction. Karen thought she had me cornered. She thought her rules were ironclad, but she hadn't done her homework. I left the clerk's office with the deed carefully tucked back into its folder, a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just defending myself. I had a weapon, but I knew better than to march straight to Karen with the news. That woman thrived on confrontation. No, this needed patience, timing, precision. Still, the tide had to turn somehow, and it started, unexpectedly, with an old widow named Ruth. I found her on her porch 2 evenings later, rocking in her chair, a glass of sweet tea sweating in her hand. Ruth was one of the oldest residents in Pine Hollow, sharp as a tack even at 80. "Evening, Sam," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "Evening, Ruth." She squinted at me over her glasses. "You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders lately." I let out a humorless chuckle. "Feels that way. Karen's got her claws in deep, doesn't she?" The bitterness in her tone surprised me. "You don't agree with her?" Ruth leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Son, I've lived here longer than most. I remember when your daddy bought that truck. I remember when this neighborhood was just dirt lots and a handful of houses. The HOA wasn't built for folks like us. It was built for folks like Karen, people who want power where they don't deserve it." Her words sank into me like rain into dry ground. "You're not alone, Sam," she added softly. "A lot of us don't like what she's doing, but people are scared. She's turned the whole town into her little kingdom. Folks don't want to cross her." "Then why tell me?" I asked. Ruth's eyes gleamed in the fading light. "Because someone's got to stand up to her, and I reckon you're the man to do it." For the first time, I felt something more than anger, more than defiance. I felt hope. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed spread out in front of me, Ruth's words echoing in my mind. I thought about the others who might be quietly watching, waiting for someone to break Karen's hold. And I thought about my father's handwriting. "Never let them take it." I poured myself a drink and whispered into the empty kitchen, "Don't worry, Dad. I won't." The next blow from Karen came sooner than I expected. It was Saturday morning when I heard the rumble of a tow truck coming up Maple Ridge Lane. My stomach turned to ice. I stepped outside to see Karen standing at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, lips curled in satisfaction. Behind her, the tow truck backed in, chains rattling, the driver looking uncertain but ready to follow orders. "You've had your warnings," Karen called. "Now we're removing it today." I walked forward slowly, the deed folder tucked under my arm. "You sure about that?" She smirked. "The HOA has authority to enforce compliance. You've left us no choice." The tow driver glanced at me, then at her. "Ma'am, I need confirmation before I—" "You have it," Karen snapped. "Now do your job." The driver climbed out, chains clanking as he approached the Ford. That's when I opened the folder. "Hold it right there," I said, my voice carrying across the yard. I held the deed high so everyone could see. Neighbors had gathered on their porches, curiosity pulling them like moths to flame. "This," I said, "is an original deed, recorded before the Pine Hollow HOA even existed, which means this land, my land, is not under your authority. Not now, not ever." Karen's smile faltered. I stepped closer, my voice steady, hard. "If you lay one finger on this truck, it won't be an HOA matter anymore. It'll be trespassing, theft, and I'll see to it that the law handles you, not the other way around." The driver froze, looking between us. "Ma'am, if that's true, I can't touch it." Karen's face flushed red. "He's bluffing, don't listen to him." But I saw doubt flicker in her eyes, and in that moment, I knew the tide was shifting. That night, word spread faster than fire in dry grass. The story of Karen's failed attempt, the deed I'd revealed, the tow truck that drove away empty. By Sunday, people were talking in the diner again. Not about me, about her. "Did you hear she tried to take Sam's truck and got shut down? Maybe she's not as powerful as she thinks." Always knew she was more bark than bite. The whispers had turned. Karen had bled power, and she knew it. But I also knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A wounded predator doesn't slink away, it comes back meaner. 2 days later, a letter arrived in a crisp white envelope. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm in the city, bold black letters across the top. "Whitmore and Associates. Karen's husband." The words inside made it clear. "Our client, the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association, hereby informs you that legal action will be pursued in civil court. Charges include violation of community standards, willful defiance of binding agreements, and damages to collective property value." They were coming for me in court. But as I folded the letter, a calmness settled over me, because for once I wasn't the one on the defensive. I had the deed, I had the law, I even had a few allies, however quiet. And deep down, I knew something Karen didn't. Once the truth saw daylight, her whole empire would collapse. I looked at the letter one last time, before tossing it onto the stack of unpaid fines. Let her come, because I was ready. And when the gavel finally fell, it wouldn't be me left broken. It would be her. The day of the hearing dawned hot and heavy, the kind of August heat that made the air shimmer over the blacktop. Pine Hollow had never been so quiet. Folks didn't say much, but everyone knew what was coming. It wasn't just about a truck anymore. It wasn't even about one man versus an HOA. It was about control, about whether one woman's iron grip on a town could finally be broken. I put on my best suit that morning, the same one I'd worn at my father's funeral. The jacket was a little tighter now, but it carried weight, dignity. I slid the deed folder under my arm, locked the front door, and walked down the porch steps like a soldier heading into battle. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as I passed. Some gave quick nods, almost guilty, like they wanted me to know they were rooting for me even if they couldn't say it out loud. Others turned away, afraid Karen might see. By the time I pulled into the courthouse lot, her SUV was already there, gleaming, spotless, polished within an inch of its life. She stood on the steps, clipboard in hand, talking to her husband, the attorney. Her lips curved into that familiar cold smile when she saw me. "Samuel," she said sweetly, loud enough for everyone to hear, ready to face the music. I held her gaze steady. "I hope you are." The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper. Ceiling fans whirred lazily above, moving the thick air just enough to keep it bearable. The judge, a stern man with steel-gray hair, called the room to order. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table beside her husband, stacks of files neatly arranged in front of them. She looked smug, confident, as if victory was already hers. I sat alone at the defendant's table, just me and the folder. Her husband rose first, his voice smooth as polished glass. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendant has willfully defied HOA regulations, refused to pay fines, and damaged the property values of this community. We ask for immediate enforcement of penalty, including removal of the non-compliant vehicle and foreclosure if necessary." He sat satisfied. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Harlan, how do you respond?" I rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down but not breaking. I opened the folder and held up the deed. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady, carrying across the silent courtroom. "This land, my land, was purchased by my father in 1972. This deed was signed, sealed, and recorded before the Pine Hollow HOA even existed, which means their rules have no authority. None." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's face paled, then flushed crimson. I stepped forward, laying the deed carefully on the judge's bench. "For weeks, they've fined me, threatened me, harassed me. They even tried to tow my truck in the dead of night. All of it illegal. This deed proves it, and every action they've taken against me is void." The judge examined the document, flipping through the yellowed pages with care. He compared signatures, seals, and dates. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "This deed is valid," he said firmly, "filed and recorded prior to the establishment of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. Mr. Harlan's property is therefore exempt from HOA jurisdiction." The gavel came down once, sharp and final. Case dismissed. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few chuckles. Karen shot to her feet, eyes blazing. "This is outrageous," she shouted. "He's lying, he's manipulating." "Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore," the judge snapped. "This matter is closed." But she didn't sit. She pointed at me, finger trembling with rage. "You think this means you've won? You can't fight me, Samuel. I run Pine Hollow." I turned to face her, my voice calm but cutting. "Not anymore." Word spread like wildfire. By the time I drove back down Maple Ridge Lane, folks were out on porches, waving, nodding, clapping. Ruth raised her glass of sweet tea as I passed, her smile wide and proud. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight slide off my shoulders. Karen's empire had cracked. Within days, neighbors who once turned away were suddenly friendly again, stopping by to shake my hand, to apologize. The silence at the diner lifted, replaced by warm greetings and fresh coffee poured with a smile. And Karen, she vanished. Her SUV no longer prowled the streets. Her clipboard no longer tapped against doors. Rumor was the HOA board called an emergency and voted her out. Some said her husband pulled her back, embarrassed. Others said she left town altogether, too ashamed to show her face. I didn't much care. All I cared about was walking out to the driveway each morning, resting my hand on the hood of that old Ford, and knowing it was safe, knowing my father's legacy was safe. One evening, a week after the trial, Ruth stopped by with a peach pie. We sat on the porch, the crickets singing in the twilight, the truck gleaming faintly in the driveway. "You did it, Sam," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, we did it. Folks just needed to be reminded Karen wasn't bigger than the law." Ruth smiled. "Maybe so, but it takes one man to light the fire." I looked out across Pine Hollow, the valley bathed in golden light, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. But even in that peace, a question lingered. How many more Karens were out there? How many more little kingdoms built on fear and silence, waiting for someone to push back? I didn't know the answer, but I knew this. If another fight came my way, I'd be ready. Because once you've stood up to a tyrant, whether they wear a crown, a badge, or a clipboard, you don't forget how. And as the first stars flickered over Pine Hollow, I leaned back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and smiled. Karen thought she could take my truck, but in the end, I took back my town.